are there brands, now that we've stated that it's not inclusive, would you say that there are brands that support and the queer community in practice? Like, you know what I mean?
So when people say support the queer community in Washington State, I'm gonna be just blatant and say it. They support the white queer community. And they forget that the queer community was really started by Black and Latina femmes that wanted their own space away from whites, and they created their own word, queer. And it feels like right now the white queer community just keeps coming up with more identities when we've already established, like, you don't really need to define yourself. You can just be you. Yeah, just be you. And they keep moving the goalposts at the same time. So it's like they're changing identities and they're moving the goalposts. I feel like it's like the 3-point line all over again.
I was thinking that because as I was preparing for this, I was like, oh, they added more letters. And it was to make it more inclusive, and I fully support that. But like now it's becoming so heavy. You know what I mean? And like, it's so heavy that I have to break down all these letters. I have to learn all these letters to break it down to get someone to understand it. And yes, the idea is that they want to understand it, right? So like, do that, participate in that conversation all the way around. But what if like we just didn't have to ask someone who they were or what they were? Like, what if we just said, hey, how are you doing today? Like, it was a normal transaction. Like,
how would you like for me to identify you, and so that when we have a conversation, what would you like to be called? I like to be called Sean Paul. What is your name?
Lotta. I go by Lotta.
Go by Lotta. Cool. From here on out, I will always call you Lotta. Anyone else says anything otherwise, no, that's Lotta. You respect Lotta. I don't need to give you a gender. I already know who you are. Yeah. I don't care what you do with your time, as long as you're not causing harm. And that brings a very interesting point, that a lot of this is because it's really white men who are still controlling a lot of this stuff, right? And they're pushing a lot of these toxic masculinity ideas.
Yes. And I wouldn't say, yes, that's a fact. It's unfortunate because I know great men,
yeah,
or Black, that like have done so much to destroy that idea, that like helped me destroy the colonial and patriarchal things that are in my head just because of how they look at life. And it sucks that there are so many on the other side, you know what I'm saying, still upholding these bullshit beliefs. It's like, that's the most frustrating part about this. Like, even some of your own people are like, what the fuck are you doing? And like, you can't see yourself as wrong.
And see, that's the problem, is and that's where I don't think a lot of white people really understand the whole point of the queer community's origins. It was to really start breaking down labels and be allowing people to define themselves and letting them just live their own life. When there's the new edition, I've been looking into it, the Two Spirit. I've known that my entire life, you know.
Yes.
But that is not my culture. So I hope that the people who now want to identify as Two Spirit are of the cultures that Two Spirit is a thing, because that is a very serious appropriation. That why I keep saying white people just keep changing the goalposts, where it's like, I'm this, but I can also be this, but I can also be this. Like, do you understand that you're decolonizing your mind and you're breaking down gender confines and sexuality confinements, and that really you're saying that I don't want to be labeled because it's really stressful to be labeled all the time. Yeah, it is. But how do you think Black people feel? How do you think Black queers feel? How do you think Black queer women feel? How do you think fat, Black, queer, able, all those things? And that's why white people really will never understand intersectionality, which is a major part of the queer community, because they might have something, but at the end of the day, they can go back to being white. And the whole structure is set up for them to just live, not necessarily succeed, but for them to just exist.
Yeah. And I that is factual. Non-debated on this end. I've observed it. And it is I've observed it for a very long time, especially working in the veterinary industry. It was an easy transition for me from the veterinary industry to the cannabis industry, still looking like me because I've been just the only me in the facility for as long as I've been in the workforce. You know what I mean? Except for my very first job. That was the wildest thing. That was the most enlightening experience of my entire life, to have a Black manager, a majority Black or Latino staff. Like, thank you, Florida, because it was the realest spot of business, and stuff moved. There was no half stepping. There was no need to explain yourself. You know what I mean? And there was no disrespect allowed. Like, who you're just like, okay, so you don't like who you're speaking to, so you want to speak to a manager, and when you get to the manager and the manager looks like me, what are you gonna say? What are you gonna say except you're sorry? You know what I mean? And that's like that little amount, that little bit of representation is not even something that they can fathom, that they can understand. You know what I mean? Like that having that support. I can't go to my supervisor when I am literally like having a negative experience, like, you know what I mean? Not my main supervisor, when I'm having a negative experience, because he can't understand that this experience is only negative because I'm a Black queer woman. That's the only reason.
Let's talk about how a lot of people don't understand what being Black means, and they think that it just means your skin tone. Yeah. And that's not what it is, because there's a lot of people who are in many communities and many spaces that act white, and they will shuck, jive, and do anything just to be accepted. And I'm sorry that they have to use that survival tactic to make sure that they're not being harmed, but they don't understand that what they're doing is harming the rest of the community, because while they're willing to allow these jokes, allow the appropriation, when people is like, that's not right, you shouldn't do that. My Black friend is cool with it. What do you mean? Because nobody has set them straight.
Never in their life. No one has said, nah, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you're not even going to go there. And if you want to know why, we can have that conversation, but I do not owe you an explanation. If I choose to give it, you're welcome.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So then, like, okay, so we got to keep this rolling. You know what I mean? We don't
want to shout out my old manager, Whitney, at Herbal Nation. She was the only Black manager I've ever had here in the 502. Black manager, not Black appearing. Because when we had some very serious racial moments, I was able to talk to her and be like, yo, I'm not tripping, right? Because we know how this scene acts. They will gaslight the hell out of you and be like, no, you're crazy. This is how people act. And you're like, no, this is not. You're dehumanizing me. No, stop with that.
Yes, for sure.